All right, next I'd like to take a look at lightning, very dynamic meteorologic phenomena. And so lightning is associated with charge in the form of electrons moving from cloud to ground. Or electrons moving from cloud to cloud. It turns out that at least 2/3 of all lightning occurs between the clouds, and only perhaps 1/3 is from cloud to ground, although that is the kind of lightning that we encounter the most. So we can say then that this is another form of lightning then, where the electrons move from cloud to cloud. But first we have to get a supply of electrons. And so typically that tends to happen in a cloud as hailstones interact with ice crystals. So we have typically very strong updrafts in an unstable cloud. So that cloud expands and it cools, and in the process of getting cool, the water turns to ice, and so we get hail and ice crystals. So here in this model, the ice crystals are moving upward. While the hailstones are moving downward. And so in this interaction between the collisions of the upward moving ice crystals and the downward moving hailstones, charge is transferred in the form of electrons from one to the other. So the ice crystals become positively charged and the electrons are transferred to the hailstones. So the hailstones move downward toward the bottom of the cloud. And so the bottom of the cloud begins to build up a net negative charge, while the ice crystals move up to the top of the cloud and produce a net positive charge at the top of the cloud. So now we've got a significant charge separation between the upper part of the cloud and the lower part of the cloud. Now, it would be nice if we could have more data on exactly what this method of charge transfer involves. The problem with getting this data is that every time that an airplane flies into a cloud like this, it's struck multiple times by lightning. Sometimes as many as 50 lightning strikes can happen as a plane moves through a group of clouds. And so that's very dangerous to gather this kind of information. But we know that it has something to do with this interaction or this collision between the smaller ice crystals and the larger hailstones. And so it's logical to assume that the ice crystals are helping to deposit the positive charge on the top part of the cloud, whereas the heavier hailstones are contributing to the charge on the bottom part of the cloud. Now, because negative charges repel, we have what's called an induction effect, which happens between the bottom of the cloud and the ground. And interestingly enough, previous lightning strikes have given the surface of the Earth a net negative charge. And so this is overwhelmed in the vicinity of a negatively charged cloud by the repulsive force of the negative electrons for the negative electrons in the cloud. So this pushes the negative electrons in the ground away from the cloud and leaves the surface with a net positive charge. So we can say then that the electric fields induce a positive surface charge. where this positive surface charge is not so much the attracting of positives to the surface, but rather due to the repulsion of the negative electrons to greater depths beneath the surface. So now we have a charge separation between the cloud and the ground. And so what begins to happen then is that we get a motion of electrons going from the cloud to the ground. But this is not a lightning bolt yet. What we get instead is a pooling of electrons. And then these electrons are moving just at a few centimeters per second. And they start traveling along irregular, jagged paths due to the resistance to the motion of these electrons. But they are not part of what we would call a lightning bolt, but rather these are deposits of electrons that are referred to as the stepped leader. So these are negative electrons then that are moving down along these irregular, jagged paths toward the ground. And we can get a branching effect in which we get many of these stepped leaders moving along different paths toward the ground, like this. And as these pools of electrons move toward the ground at a very slow speed, this is not a lightning bolt, but rather just the slow pooling buildup of electrons as they move from the cloud to the ground. Eventually, when it gets within a few hundred feet of the ground, it generates such strong electric fields that we get what are called weakly luminous plasma filaments that rise up toward the stepped leader. Now, plasma is a hot ionized gas. And so these positive plasma filaments are actually molecules of air that have had their electrons torn off. And so these positive plasma filaments move up toward the stepped leader. And so they're trying to connect, because the moment that one of them connects, that will close the switch, as it were, and allow for something like a 30,000 ampere current to flow from the cloud to the ground. So we're talking about enormous amounts of charge flowing from the cloud to the ground. There's so much energy generated in this kind of a process that all of the electrical storms on the Earth use up more energy than every electrical appliance in the world. So there is a dominance of this energy flow that is associated with this natural process of lightning. And so eventually then we get to the point where one of these connects. And so the one that connects is what closes the switch. And so then this starts to empty out charge from all of these these stepped leader branching points. Okay, and so once one connects, the charge starts to flow. And so first it'll flow out through, say, this part of the stepped leader here. And so those negative electrons will flow down to the ground. Then this part will empty out. Then this part will empty out. But it'll follow that path of least resistance. Then this part will empty out. Then this part will empty out. Then this part will empty out. And so even though it's electrons that are flowing from the cloud to the ground that are causing this light, this part of the lightning bolt lights up first. Then this part lights up as each successive part of the stepped leader empties its charge out. And then finally, the charge is emptied out from the remaining negative charge in the bottom of the cloud. And so we can see that in this animation on the data projector. Here on this figure 1, we see the actual motion of the charges once the plasma filament has connected. So the plasma filament reaches up until it connects, and then all of the charge starts to flow out. Okay? But what you see here is on the right-hand figure is what is lighting up first in the lightning bolt. And so this part lights up first because that part of the charge is flowing out first. So if you can see both of these at the same time, what you see is that as the charge flows out, that part of the lightning bolt lights up. And then when this part of the charge flows out, then that part of the lightning bolt lights up. And so this gives the illusion then of what's called a return stroke, in which it looks like the lightning is traveling from the ground to the cloud. But it's actually an illusion caused by the fact that the electrons are flowing from the cloud to the ground, but the bottom part of the stepped leader empties out first, followed by the remaining portions of the cloud emptying out. And so we can look at actual pictures, and these I have for you in modules. You can see here, what we just did was understanding lightning, and then the next one is slow motion lightning pictures. And so we can see here then, if we can zoom in on this, we see the stepped leader moving down. We can let that happen again. Here we go. Here the stepped leaders are moving down, and then the plasma filaments reach up, and at the moment that the plasma filament connects, we get the lightning strike. Okay, so here are the plasma filaments moving down, then the plasma filament moves, the stepped leader moves down, the plasma filaments move up. When they connect, then we get the bright lightning bolt. Here we go. Here, if we look at this one, we see the one that connects first is the one that is the preferred path for the lightning. And so this is something that you can play around with and look at it at your leisure. That you can see that in slow motion it looks like the flow of charges from the ground to the cloud, and that's what's called a return stroke. But it's actually a misnomer, because it's really always electrons traveling from the cloud to the ground. Okay, so perhaps 1/3 of lightning bolts follow this pattern. However, in an alternative kind of a situation, we could have negative charge here, and then perhaps negative charge there, but positive charge here. And so you could get a lightning bolt then going from negative to positive within the cloud. And so perhaps 2/3 of lightning strikes follow this kind of a path. and so if we look over here at this picture, we can first see, and this is on page 412 of your textbook, this is the preferred mechanism for the separation of charge within the cloud. Here we have the slow growing of the stepped leader, the plasma filaments reaching up to connect with it, and then the lightning bolt. Here in this next picture, we have a very, and this is on page 413, a very amazing and dynamic picture of lightning. Sometimes when you have many stepped leaders reaching out in such a complicated way, we can think of this as being associated with a superstorm. Okay? And so the superstorms that we talked about last time that also generate tornadoes are also responsible for a majority of the largest lightning bolts that we see. Here we can see some other types of lightning that are associated with higher elevation. We have elves at very high elevation. We have blue jets at lower elevation. The blue jets are associated with ionization of air in the atmosphere and can be much more powerful lightning bolts. These elves and also sprites are associated with high altitude lightning. Now at very high altitude, the Earth tends to be more positively charged. And so the flow of electrons then is driven by the positive charge in the upper atmosphere, rather than the negative charge the way it is when we go from cloud to ground. Okay, and so if you're walking along the ground here, and let's say one of these plasma filaments is nearby to you and is trying to reach up toward the stepped leader but isn't quite there, then what you may experience is your hair standing straight out. And so if your hair stands straight out, this is an early warning signal that you may be a path for the next lightning bolt. Because as the weakly luminous plasma filaments reach up toward the stepped leader, one of them is going to connect first. And if that happens to be the one that you are nearby to, then your hair standing out straight like this is a good indication that you should run for cover. Okay? And so the reason why your hair stands straight out is that your hair has a net positive charge, meaning that electrons have been taken away from your hair. And so then these positive charges want to maintain a maximum possible separation distance from each other. And so the way that they do that is by spreading themselves out equally over the surface of your head. And so it's not that you're really scared, but maybe you should be if your hair is standing straight out like that. And so what do you do then to preserve your life? Well, first we should mention that about 20% of all lightning strikes where people are hit by lightning happen while people are playing golf in the United States. This is a very popular sport in the United States, and this is an indication of how addicted some people are to playing golf. That even with those early warning signals, lightning bolts striking all over the place, and possibly even your hair standing on end, that you don't leave the golf course. You want to keep playing through it, and are then struck by lightning. of the people that are struck by lightning, about 80% survive. But of those 80%, 60% of the survivors have permanent injuries. Now, when we say that people are struck by lightning, this does not necessarily mean that the lightning bolt hits them directly. The lightning bolt is a few inches across and is at a temperature that's about the surface temperature of the sun. Okay, so we're looking at maybe 10,000 degrees and about this wide. And so if you're hit by something like that, and these electrons perhaps are moving at a third the speed of light, then there's probably not much hope for you. However, a lot of people that say that they're struck by lightning are actually feeling the residual effects of being close to a lightning strike, but not being actually struck by lightning. And so remember that topographic considerations have a lot to do with where the lightning strikes. If we have a plasma filament that starts from a tree, then that has less distance to go to reach the stepped leader that's nearby than, say, if you were out in the open. This plasma filament has farther to go, and so therefore the tree is going to be more likely to be struck by lightning than something that's lower down to the ground. And so you can more greatly improve your chances by getting down low. So you want to crouch down, keep your feet fairly close together. Not the greatest picture, so let me try to demonstrate here. I'll get down low like this. And I want to crouch down, but I don't want to lay all the way down on the ground. If I lay down on the ground, then there's a longer distance to generate a larger electric potential difference if lightning were to travel, hit the ground, and then the electricity travel through the ground. So you want to stay low. You want to keep your feet as close together as possible. But not so close together that you're unstable. Because if I'm unstable, then I might fall this way, and by Murphy's law, that would be the moment that the lightning bolt strikes, and then it can travel up this unfavorable path through my heart. And so you want to be low, but not too low, because if you're all the way down on the ground like this, then you're less likely to be struck directly. But if the lightning were to, say, strike this tree, then the charge can flow out this way, and over the length of your body, there's a larger potential difference, which can be associated with a more current flow through your body. So you don't want to lay out flat. You want to have as little contact with the ground as possible and keep your feet close together. It's also not a good idea to hide under one of these objects that might be struck by lightning. Not a good idea at all, because the electricity is going to flow like this, and then it's going to flow out along the ground like that. And so if you're standing here beneath the tree, then you're going to have the lightning tend to move along this unfavorable path. Okay? And so that is not good. On the top of Mount Whitney, there is, at one time, there was a tin shack. They've rebuilt it now. But for a while, there was a tin shack up at the top. And so it's thought that because going into a car is considered to be a relatively safe place to go during a lightning strike, that the tin shack would give you the same kind of help. And so during one electrical storm, there were 6 people inside of this tin shack. It was struck by lightning, and so it's true, the shape of the metal structure deflected the electrons away from direct contact with the people, but unfortunately a lot, because the floor was not insulated, a lot of the electrical charge moved through the floor and up through the people's bodies that were in here. And so 6 of those people were electrocuted and 1 of them died. Okay? And so it's not necessarily the greatest place to go, but a car is considered to be a good place to go. As long as you don't touch anything metal, you can get inside your car and not touch anything metal. Then when the lightning strikes your car, it'll tend to flow this way around the metal shell and out through the tires into the ground. And so this is okay. This is not okay, but this, if you're stuck out in the open, is considered to be one of the more favorable configurations to get into. But your best bet is, if you can, get indoors.